The international press conference in Manila fell silent. It was June 2019, and the ASEAN Linguistic Summit had brought together journalists, academics, and diplomats from across the globe. The grand ballroom of the Manila Hotel was filled with cameras, microphones, and the low hum of simultaneous translation equipment. On stage sat a panel of language experts, each representing their country's linguistic heritage. Among them was Dr. Elena Reyes, a 42-year-old Filipino linguist from the University of the Philippines, who had dedicated her life to preserving and promoting Tagalog and other Philippine languages. Elena was elegant but unassuming, with warm brown eyes, shoulder-length black hair, often tied in a simple bun, and a quiet confidence that came from decades of scholarly work. She wore a traditional Filipiniana blouse with modern tailoring, a subtle statement of pride in her heritage. Next to her sat Jackson Miller, a 51-year-old American reporter from a major U.S. news network, known for his sharp commentary and sometimes controversial takes on cultural issues. He had been sent to cover the summit, but had been invited to sit on the panel as a representative of international media. The conference had been progressing smoothly until Jackson leaned toward his microphone during a Q&A session. A young Filipino student had just asked Elena a question in Tagalog about language preservation, and Elena had responded fluently, her voice warm and authoritative. Jackson chuckled softly, then spoke into his mic. "Tagalog is just a dialect," Jackson said, his tone casual but cutting. "It has no real linguistic value on the global stage. English is the language of business, of science, of progress. These regional languages are charming, of course, but they're holding people back from true advancement." The room grew still. Some journalists stopped typing. Other panelists exchanged uncomfortable glances. A few audience members looked down, their faces tight with frustration. Elena did not flinch. She had heard variations of this before, from colonial educators who dismissed native tongues, from international organizations that prioritized English above all, from people who mistook multilingualism for confusion rather than richness. She adjusted her glasses, looked Jackson in the eye, and spoke calmly, first in Tagalog, then in English. "Ang wika ay hindi tungkol sa pagiging superior. Ito ay tungkol sa pagkakakilanlan." She paused, letting the Tagalog resonate. "Language is not about superiority. It is about identity. Every language carries the wisdom of a people, their history, their way of seeing the world. If you lose your language, you lose a part of your soul." Jackson's expression hardened. He did not argue. He simply shrugged and said, "Poetic, but impractical. In the real world, people need English to succeed." He turned away from the microphone, ending his participation in the panel. The journalists watched him, then looked at Elena. The challenge had been issued, though not in words. The clock was ticking. 3 months passed. The initial summit had ended with mixed reactions. Some attendees were inspired by Elena's defense of linguistic diversity. Others remained skeptical, loyal to the idea that English was the only language that mattered in global affairs. Jackson returned to the United States, but the memory of that conversation lingered. Meanwhile, Elena and her team at the UP Linguistics Department continued their work, documenting endangered languages, creating educational materials, and building a reputation for solving communication problems that monolingual systems could not handle. What Jackson did not know was that Elena had spent years studying not only Philippine languages, but also the cognitive benefits of multilingualism, research that showed how speaking multiple languages enhanced problem-solving, creativity, and cultural empathy. Elena's work was not confined to academic journals. It was lived in the communities where elders taught children the old words, where poets wrote in Tagalog, and where translators worked tirelessly to make sure that no voice was left unheard. She had grown up in a small town in Batangas, where her grandmother told stories in Tagalog that carried lessons no English textbook could teach. That upbringing had taught her something that global institutions often forgot. Language is not just a tool. It is a bridge between generations, a carrier of culture, and a foundation of identity. Then, in September 2019, a critical situation arose. The ASEAN Economic Summit was scheduled to take place in Manila, bringing together heads of state, business leaders, and diplomats from across Southeast Asia. But a crisis emerged just weeks before the event. A major international corporation had sent a complex proposal involving multiple countries, written in a mix of English, Mandarin, and local languages. The document contained nuanced legal terms, cultural references, and technical specifications that required precise translation to avoid diplomatic misunderstandings. The UN translation team, overwhelmed by the complexity and the tight deadline, struggled to produce an accurate version. Mistakes began to appear. Misunderstandings multiplied. The summit was at risk of being postponed, which would cost millions and damage international relations. The Philippine Department of Foreign Affairs escalated the problem to the regional coordination team. Jackson, who was covering the summit for his network, heard about the crisis and mentioned it on air. "This is what happens when you rely on too many languages," he said during a broadcast. "If everyone just used English, we wouldn't have these problems." His words were picked up by social media and began to spread, drawing criticism from linguists and cultural advocates worldwide. But the problem remained unsolved. The deadline was approaching. The pressure was mounting. Then a call came from the DFA Undersecretary. "There's a linguist in Manila. She solved a similar issue for a regional trade agreement last year. Her team uses a multilingual approach that preserves meaning across languages. Maybe you should talk to her." Jackson hesitated. He remembered Elena. He remembered the panel. He remembered the dismissal he had shown. But with the summit at stake and his network's reputation on the line, he agreed to visit. When Jackson arrived at Elena's linguistics hub in Quezon City, the scholar was reviewing documents with her team. She emerged from the meeting room, greeted Jackson with a respectful nod, and offered him coffee. There was no anger, no gloating, just quiet readiness. Jackson explained the situation, the translation crisis, the approaching deadline, the pressure from multiple governments. Elena listened carefully, then asked a series of questions about the document. What languages were involved? What were the cultural contexts? Who were the intended audiences? Had there been previous attempts at translation? The translators exchanged glances. These were not the questions they had focused on. They had been trying to translate word for word, maintaining the structure of the original. Elena was asking about meaning, context, and purpose. "Bring me the document and let me see the original," Elena said. The team arranged for the files to be delivered to her hub. Elena spent the first day simply reading. She read the English sections, the Mandarin portions, the fragments in Thai and Vietnamese. She noted the cultural references, the idioms, the technical terms that had no direct equivalents. She placed her hand on the pages, closed her eyes, and concentrated. The translators watched, uncertain what to make of it. To them, this was not translation, it was interpretation. But Elena was doing something they had not considered. She was treating the document not as a set of words to be converted, but as a message to be understood and carried across languages with its soul intact. On the second day, Elena identified a pattern. The errors were not random. They occurred in sections where cultural context was essential, where a direct translation would lose the intended meaning. She noticed that the original document had been written by people who understood the nuances of their own languages, but the translation team had tried to flatten everything into a single linguistic framework. The document was not broken, it was being misunderstood. Elena explained her theory to Jackson and the translation team. You cannot translate culture word for word. You have to translate meaning. In Tagalog, we have a concept called kapwa. It means others, but it also means shared self. It's a worldview that sees connection where your translation sees separation. We need to bring in native speakers of each language, not to translate words, but to translate meaning. We need to create a multilingual glossary that preserves cultural context. And we need to build a feedback loop where each translation is reviewed by someone who understands both the source and target cultures. The translators were skeptical. This was not the kind of solution they had been trained to pursue. It was too collaborative, too human. But Jackson, remembering the stakes, gave the order, try it. Elena and her team worked for 3 days straight. They brought in native speakers from each language community in Manila. They created a multilingual glossary that preserved cultural context, not just definitions. They built a simple collaborative platform where translators could review each other's work and flag potential misunderstandings. On the 4th day, they completed the translation. It was accurate, nuanced, and culturally sensitive. They tested it with speakers of each language. The meaning held. The tone was preserved. The diplomatic intent was clear. When Jackson returned, he reviewed the translation, checked the feedback, and spoke with the diplomats who would use the document. The problem was solved. The summit could proceed. He looked at Elena, then at the team of translators who had spent weeks struggling with word-for-word conversion, while a Filipino linguist had solved the problem in 4 days by listening, understanding, and bridging cultures. Jackson's expression softened. He bowed his head slightly, a gesture of profound respect. "Dr. Reyes," he said, "I was wrong. I judged your work because it was different from what I understood. I thought language was just a tool for communication. But you showed me that language is a bridge between souls. You did not just translate a document, you taught us how to see each other differently." The translation was accepted by all parties. The ASEAN summit proceeded successfully. The international corporation praised the accuracy and cultural sensitivity of the work, but the impact went beyond the technical fix. Jackson returned to the United States with a new perspective. He began advocating for a more inclusive approach to language in international media. He invited Elena to speak at a global journalism conference, where the linguist shared her methods with reporters from across the world. The story of the Manila Linguistics Hub spread, not as a tale of humiliation, but as a lesson in mutual respect and the value of diverse linguistic systems. In the months that followed, the UN announced a new initiative, a multilingual translation hub in Quezon City, with Elena as chief consultant. The hub would train translators in advanced techniques while preserving cultural context. It would also serve as a testing ground for adaptations to international documents that accounted for Southeast Asian linguistic nuances. The first full scholarship apprentice, a young translator named Carlo, was selected to train in Geneva and bring that knowledge back to the Philippines. Carlo was 26 years old, fresh out of Ateneo de Manila, with a degree in linguistics. He had grown up in a small town in Cavite, where his mother spoke Tagalog at home and his father spoke Ilocano. He had seen firsthand how language could both connect and divide people. When he received the scholarship, he cried, not because he had won something, but because he finally had a chance to prove that Filipino linguists could stand alongside the best in the world. Elena mentored Carlo personally. She taught him not only the technical skills, but also the philosophy behind multilingual translation. "Never forget," she told him, "that every language carries a worldview. If you translate only words, you will fail. If you translate meaning, you will succeed. Carlo took those words to heart. When he traveled to Geneva for his training, he carried not just his textbooks, but the stories of his mother's Tagalog poems, his father's Ilocano songs, and the communities where Filipinos code-switched between languages with effortless grace. The translation hub in Quezon City became more than a workplace. It became a symbol of what could be achieved when humility met expertise, when words met meaning, and when respect replaced dismissal. Jackson had come to evaluate Filipino linguistics. He left having learned from it. And Elena, who had once been told her language was just a dialect, now stood as a bridge between worlds, proving that excellence is not owned by any single tongue, but created when different voices come together. Years later, when Carlo returned from Geneva, he brought with him a new generation of translators who understood that the future of communication was not about choosing between English and local languages. It was about combining them. The hub in Quezon City became a model for other Southeast Asian countries. Translators from Thailand, Vietnam, and Indonesia came to learn. They saw that translation was not about replacing, it was about connecting. They saw that the best solutions came not from imposing one language on everyone, but from listening to the unique rhythms of each tongue and honoring them. The story of the Filipino linguist who shocked the world did not end with a single victory. It became a movement that said, every language matters, every voice counts. And when we open our ears to diverse tongues, we all become richer. True intelligence is not about speaking the most prestigious language. It is about understanding the depth of every tongue, respecting the wisdom that comes from different worldviews, and recognizing that language is not a hierarchy, but a tapestry. Traditional linguistic knowledge and modern communication are not enemies. They are partners. When we combine them with humility, we create understanding that neither could achieve alone. The Filipino spirit of multilingualism, code switching between Tagalog, English, and local languages with ease, does not weaken communication. It strengthens it because it reminds us that every language carries the soul of a people. And when we honor that soul, we build not just better translations, but a better world.